Professor Gilday, let's open up this segment by talking about your book, Children of the Revolution, the French from 1799 to 1914. Please tell us a little bit about this book.
Well, it was a book that I was asked to write. In the 1950s, there was a 3-volume history of modern France by a man called Alfred Cobbin. And the publisher, Penguin, decided to have it rewritten in 3 volumes written by 3 different historians. So there was one written on the 18th century, one written on the 20th century, and I was asked to write on the 19th century. And I called it Children of the Revolution because what struck me was, one of the great stories of the 19th century is although, as I said earlier, the monarchy was restored in 1814, 1815, and then
after Napoleon's fall.
Yeah, so you have the revolution, you have the republic. That's replaced by Napoleon in 1789 when he falls in 1814 and 1815, because he falls twice. He's replaced by the monarchy. And that lasts until 1848. And then you have another republic, which lasts until 1852. And then you have another empire of Napoleon III. And then the republic comes back in 1870, and in fact lasts until 1940, when France is defeated. But, so although you've got this kind of regime change, and although you have got what people call the restoration and the return to some kind of conservatism and a French attempt to have a kind of constitutional monarchy in the British style, nevertheless, the theme of revolution is very powerful. And what I tried to do also, which was I'm not sure I succeeded, was to look at it in terms of generations. So they were different generations who had a different attitude to revolution. So, for example, you had the Romantic generation. That's the generation born sort of during the French Revolution, who then became, the great writers and artists of the Romantic era, and they were also the people who kind of generated revolution in 1830 and 1848. Then later on, when the revolution of 1848 is crushed, there's a lot of disillusionment, and people start to think about, how come we have these revolutions and we have these republics and they fail? Maybe we need to get organized. Maybe we need to set up a republic which is stronger, and which is stronger against conservative powers and also stronger against popular revolt. And the people who set up the Third Republic in 1870, organized a proper, stable republic, and they put a huge emphasis on education. Their view was ordinary people had to be educated in not only school subjects, but in what they call moral and civic education. They tried to replace religious education by civic education to try to train people to become French citizens. And that was a much more kind of technocratic, pragmatic view of revolution by a generation that had been very disillusioned and wanted to make sure that disillusion didn't happen again. So I suppose I tried to say, well, there were different generations of revolution, or different generations of children of revolution, who kind of made France differently at different points through the 19th century.
You and I are talking about revolution, and that term keeps on coming up. How is a revolution defined? Like, how is a revolution different than, say, a riot, a rebellion, or even a revolt? There's this apocryphal line, which I'm sure I'm going to butcher. Someone comes to Louis XVI and tells him about what's happening outside, and he asks, is it a revolt? And he says, no, sire, it's a revolution. Something to that extent, to that effect. But it goes down to the fact that revolution is different than all the other stuff, right?
Well, I mean, your example points to the fact that it kind of depends on your point of view. So if you don't like things going on in the street, you'll call them riots, or you'll talk about the mob. The mob is bringing down civilization, and it's upsetting society, and it's attacking the church, and but if you talk about a revolt, then it's kind of got a more positive spin. But if you're talking about revolution, I would say that in order to have a revolution, you need 3 elements.
3 elements, okay.
Yeah, and I haven't invented this myself. This is what Lenin says. So I'm just cribbing from Lenin.
Lenin.
So he knew something about revolution.
Yeah.
So he said you need three things. The first thing is you need a popular movement. So the people, whether it's the peasants, the workers, they have to be on the move. They kind of have to be having jacqueries or peasant revolts, or they have to be having strike action. So you need that. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need the ruling class to be divided. So the ruling class, the educated class, the professional class, whatever you want to call it, you need a portion, an element of that ruling class to break away and to put itself at the head of the popular movement.
That's very discerning.
So for example, the French Revolution, people like Robespierre, Danton, those French revolutionaries were themselves middle class, but they put themselves at the head of the revolution. If you go into the 19th century, Marx, of course, was middle class, but he said that the socialist parties would be formed of, they would be led by intellectuals, middle class people who would put themselves at the head of a popular movement. So that's just, because if the ruling class is united against the popular movement, that popular movement will fail. It'll be put down. For example, as such popular movements were put down in Britain in the early 19th century. I don't know whether you've come across the Peterloo massacre of 1819. I mean, workers and Manchester workers were kind of crushed by the bourgeois militia. So if the middle class, if the ruling class holds together against popular movements, the popular movements won't succeed. And the other thing you need for a revolution to succeed is what you might call a crisis in the state. So the state is in difficulty. Often this is as a result of a defeat by a foreign power. So, for example, in 1789, France wasn't exactly defeated, but it was in deep financial crisis as a result of it got involved in the American War. But for example, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 is because the Russian state collapses as a result of the First World War. So you have a crisis of the state, which is both kind of material. The state isn't functioning anymore, and also in terms of legitimacy, the state loses legitimacy. So if you have all those elements together, popular movement, division in the ruling class, and a crisis in the state, then you're likely to have a revolution.
In the 1789 French Revolution, which went on for almost a decade and led to Napoleon's rise, a document came out of that I think is really interesting, and I want to know what impact it has had in French history. The title of the document is Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. What is this document about? Is it like similar to America's Declaration of Independence that sort of continues to inspire Americans?
Yes, basically it's the preamble to the Constitution.
Oh, the current Constitution.
So when the French Revolution happened, you had the king had summoned something called the Estates General to help him out with his money matters, and the Estates General was divided into a chamber for the clergy, a chamber for the nobility, and a chamber for the so-called Third Estate, which is everyone else. And one of the first acts of the revolution was to abolish those divisions and to set up what was called the National Assembly. And the National Assembly decided that it would not separate, it would not be sent away until it had made a constitution. And the first constitution, came out in 1791. But from I think it was October 8, 1789, they had the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, and that was in a sense the kind of preamble, the blueprint, the fundamental principles of what the new French state was going to look like. And the basic element was, the first thing it said was, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. And that's very similar to what the Declaration of Independence says. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Yeah.
That they are endowed by their creator with inalienable rights. And then, so first of all, everyone is equal, everyone has these rights. And then you have a list of these rights. So, for example, in the United States, these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in France, these rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression.
Oh, I love that fourth element, resistance to oppression. Okay.
Resistance to oppression. And interestingly, there was another, because the French Revolution went through so many phases and got more and more radical. So the monarchy was overthrown in 1792. The king had his head chopped off in 1793. And then a new parliament brought through a new constitution, the Constitution of 1793, which was paradoxically never actually implemented because the constitution was suspended so long as the war was going on. But this is what the final article of the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen of 1793 says. It says, when the government violates the rights of the people, insurrection is for the people and each part of the people the most sacred of rights and the most indispensable of duties.
Insurrection?
So, insurrection.
Oh, wow.
Insurrection. So, as I say, this was never actually this was never actually implemented, this constitution, because there was a war on.
Yeah.
And then it disappeared and was replaced by a much more conservative constitution in 1795, and then Napoleon brought in several constitutions, and so it goes on. But this idea that although you set up a state and you set up a government, the government is kind of on probation. And if the government violates the rights of the people, oppresses the people, tyrannizes the people, then it's out. And the people have a right, and not only a right, it says the most sacred of rights and the most indispensable of duties. So the people must go onto the streets. They must have an insurrection. They must get rid of the government. And this is the kind of thing that, it will be at the back of the French mind.
I bet.
That they have this, that they're not misbehaving. They're not being naughty boys and girls. They have an inalienable right to.
They're almost performing a duty here.
A duty. A
Interesting.
duty to secure the rights of the people.
Yeah. Government on probation. That's profound. We'll be back after a short break to talk about French politics, protests, and democracy.